Hey everyone, it's Rob, and in this video, I'm going to be kind of going over one of my favorite pieces from, honestly, one of the best games I've ever played, and that is Gustave from the Expedition 33 soundtrack. The soundtrack itself is absolutely phenomenal. There's a pretty high probability that it's going to win Soundtrack of the Year at the Game Awards. I'm pretty confident that it probably will, and it was written by Lorien Testard. So the awesome thing about Lorien is that he was originally a self-taught musician, and as I am, he ended up going to music school. I couldn't find particularly what he did, but I'm going to assume it was for composition, since that's what he's doing now. But the thing that's kind of insane about this whole ordeal is before this soundtrack was released and before Expedition 33 had come out, he didn't have any real like professional experience. So he wasn't like some groundbreakingly crazy composer that was extremely well known or anything like that. He was just kind of a dude that went to school for composition, didn't really have a whole lot of professional experience, just had a lot of passion for it, and then he ended up getting signed on to write the soundtrack for the game, and it's amazing. And it's honestly, he's a huge inspiration, and it just goes to show that as long as you have passion for something, anything is pretty much possible. So that's kind of a little spiel about that. Getting back to the soundtrack itself, my favorite piece off of it is Gustave. I think it sets up the game perfectly because it's the second piece, I believe, you hear in the game, right after the menu music. And the motif of the song is heard throughout the entire game. If you don't know what a motif is, it's essentially like a small snippet or a specific portion of a song or a piece that is repeated throughout the entire rest of the soundtrack. So even though it's not the same song or the same piece, there are little snippets of the Gustave motive or motif that goes through, and you can hear it in other songs on the soundtrack, and it keeps repeating and replaying as you play the game. So that's kind of what a motif is. I'll be kind of covering a bit of that as I analyze it and kind of breaking the actual piece down into 4 different motifs that I've kind of written out or have noticed. But of course, this video isn't about motifs and what they are. Instead, I just want to analyze the piece. And from there, at the end of the video, I'll have a little demo or a little piece that I will have written based off of the analysis that I've made of Gustave. So I'm going to try to keep things on a bit on the simpler side, and I'm not going to go through each and every interval of the piece and anything like that, or go through individual notes or anything like that. That would take way too long. So instead, it's mostly going to be talking about the chord progressions, the different motifs, maybe some patterns or some cool things that I've noticed, or, in particular, there is a modulation or a key change that happens in the piece, which is kind of cool. So I'll make note of that. But other than that, yeah, let's go ahead and step right into it. Hey, just a quick heads up before we actually step into the analysis. A few things that you'll probably want to know in order to actually understand kind of what I'm talking about that I'm not going to be going into depth or really explaining as I go through the analysis. That would be kind of time signatures, how they work, key signatures, and how chords and inversions are written, and kind of how that makes sense. And modulations, I kind of already explained, but essentially modulation is just when you change keys. And there's a bunch of different ways of how you can do that. But again, I'm not going to be talking about how you do those things or kind of like what in particular they are and how they work. Instead, I'll just be saying, hey, this is a modulation, or this is the key change, or something like that. And then just wanted to let you guys know that I'm not going to be explaining those things, but instead, those are the terms that I'm going to be using. And if you don't know what they are, that's totally fine. If you just kind of want to like look and listen to the analysis. Otherwise, if you're just more interested in hearing what I've written based off of it, that's totally cool too. I'll have a timestamp in the bottom, and you can just go right to that. But other than that, let's jump into it. All right, so this is Gustave. It's technically written by MuseScore. It's a premium score that they have, and if you want to download these scores, you have to pay for them, which I don't want to do because I'm not like performing it or like handing the sheet out or anything like that. I literally just want to talk about the music itself that was written, and primarily just want to see these chords, this chord progression here, and kind of talk about it. Normally, what I would do for pieces is I would just download the file and then I could actually like write on this, but I'm not going to be able to do that this time around. So instead, I'm just going to have my little notes here with the scale written out, at least for B, and then from there I can kind of create the chord progressions here and make my notes here and kind of talk to it or talk through it as I'm actually going through everything. So, back to the piece. The song is in B minor. Technically, with this key signature, it could be B minor or D major, but as you can see, there is no D chords at all. So this is a pretty big indicator that, hey, we are in B minor, because there's a lot of that. The other thing, too, that kind of gives it a dead giveaway is it starts on B minor, so a lot of pieces, they'll start on the tonic, and they'll end on the tonic as well. And so if I go down here, technically, because there's a key change, it changes to C sharp minor later. Yeah, it ends on the tonic. And I'll explain that in just in a bit once we get to the actual modulation. But for now, we're starting in B minor. The next thing that you'll notice is this 2/4. The time signature is a little different than normal. Most pieces are written in 4/4, so 2/4, what this means is you have 2 quarter notes per bar instead of your normal 4 quarter notes per bar. So it's kind of like a halftime of 4/4, and it sounds much slower, which is why this piece sounds like it's swaying a little slower. It's not 4 on the floor like most pieces are. So I'm not going to get into too much depth about how these time signatures actually make a difference. That would take too much time. Instead, just realize like, hey, this time signature does make a difference in the feel of the song, and it's a very noticeable difference. The next thing is the chord progressions themselves, and this kind of, again, the way that these chord progressions work is it also helps with the swing of the song. So I guess let me back up and explain by what I mean by the swing of the song. So normally when I think of a swing of a song, I think of kind of the beat. And so let's say if you were dancing with someone, or if you're dancing by yourself, like slow dancing, you normally move to the beat, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You just kind of work with it. This is going to be more like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and it keeps going back and forth like that. This is also going to be reiterated by the way that this chord progression works, because if we take a look at this and we write out the chord progression here, this goes 1, 2, 6, and then from 6 to 4, and then from 4 it goes to 5, and then back to 1. So we can see B, G, E, F, B, G, E, F, B, G, E, F, and this is the chord progression throughout the entire song. And it actually is the same exact chord progression after we modulate too. I'll get to that when we get there, but it just keeps repeating B, G, E, F, or some variation of these chords. So it's not always the same chord. These kind of fluctuate a little bit in kind of the different notes that are being played, but at the crux of everything, the chord progression for this piece is 1, 6, 4, 5. And then this 5 back to 1 is a perfect cadence, which really gives it that extra oomph. So essentially, what I mean by perfect cadence is when you go from 5 back to 1 and you're ending a motif on it, or a part of a song on that, that is a cadence. So cadence is just means ending, but particularly when you're going from the 5 to the 1, the dominant to the tonic, it is extra strong. So it sounds really, really good to go from 5 to 1. It sounds like it's resolving properly. So the next thing, kind of talking about these chords in particular, I'm a little confused with how MuseScore has these chords named. So initially normally when I look at a chord like this, G minor 6 over E, this would normally indicate that E is in the bass, but that is not the case here. This is full G. So I'm not really sure where they're getting this E, because E is played, but it's not normally when you say over E, you're indicating that this is in the bass. Maybe if someone has more experience with this than I do, they can kind of explain what this means to me. But when I read this, I'm thinking this is this chord just with E in the bass. So I'm not exactly sure what is going on here, but I wouldn't call this chord this. I would just have G minor 6, because this is G all in this bass line here. And it's even G here. So I'm not really sure what's happening with this naming convention. The next thing, I guess, would be talking about the motifs. So the first motif is going to be this 9 through 12 here. And we can just quickly listen to it. This is basically the main motif of the piece. Or the first motif, I should say. So this part in particular is the first motif. That part is kind of played throughout the rest of the piece. So what I mean by motif is, if I go back here, I think it's right here. Yep, it's replayed. So that's what a motif is. It's these little pieces of information, or these little pieces of the song that are replayed. So that is what I'm going to call the first motif. The next motif is this one. So that is also repeated. Let me try to find it. This is just when it modulates, but it's still like a similar type of thing. So that's another motif, the second one. And one thing that I will mention real quick is MuseScore has this little piano solo thing that plays. I'm not going to call this a motif at all. I think this is just extra stuff that was added on, or there is a little guitar part in the piece that does play like this, but I'm not going to really go into this and talk about this at all. It still follows the same chord progression and everything. It's just another thoughts, or another part of the piece itself that was written. I wouldn't say it's like a primary motif that is repeated, since it only happens the one time in this piece. So again, right here we can see that these chords change. And it changes pretty drastically, actually. It goes just from this chord it just goes full right into, it just modulates completely into the next key. And if I were to write out this key signature here with C sharp, so this is C sharp minor, and laid it out like this, you would have the same exact chord progression. So this is just 1, 6, 4, 5 again, and it just keeps repeating for the rest of the song. And that is basically everything with the chord progressions. I think I had a couple more motifs that I had written down and made note of. So another big motif would be this one. So that is another big motif. And then the next one that I wrote down was this one. So those are the four motifs that I have kind of selected out of this piece. And essentially, what he's doing is he has these four different motifs and he alternates through them and he replays them just in different orders. And so, like, if we go here, again, it's another variation of a motif that we heard earlier. And that's essentially what this entire piece is. It's a collection of these four motifs, like this. Again, it's another motif. So he just kind of repeats these four phrases over and over in just different sequences and slight variations. So it sounds very familiar, but it's also new because he's just slightly adjusting things, which is exactly what you do with motifs, and that's exactly what you want to do. It's very, very catchy, and all four of these are played throughout the entire soundtrack. So it's super, super cool, especially in the first area, Lumiere. That entire part of the game is all based off of the motifs from Gustave. And that is pretty much the overview that I wanted to give. Again, so pretty simple. I'm not going into the very specific notes or anything like that or intervals. Instead, what I want to do is just kind of briefly cover what was kind of going on here. The big thing is this chord progression, the four motifs that he's kind of going back and forth on, and then of course the timing. So now the next part of the video that I'm going to have is just kind of my inspired piece from it. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create my own piece based off of this. And I'm going to try to like make it a little different here. So I want to create kind of a waltz-like piece in 3/4 that follows the same sort of chord progression in a different key. I don't know what particular key I'm gonna have, but it should sound similar to Gustave in the end, I'm hoping. But still a bit different because I'm going to be using 3/4 instead of 2/4. So the timing will feel different, but the overall vibe of the piece should be the same. Alright, so here's what I wrote. It doesn't really sound like Gustave at all. Really the only similarity behind it is really the chord progression, because I kept the same exact chord progression as Gustave would have. So we go 1, 6, 4, 5, and then 1, 6, 4, 5, and this just repeats. I think the reason why this is going to sound a little different, well, not a little different, quite a bit different than Gustave, is again this timing. Like I said, timings make a big difference, so going 3/4 on this really changes the total vibe of it, and then also the way that I have the bass notes working as well. It just sounds a little different, but if you listen closely, the chord progression should sound very similar. So that's why I have this little first part here, and this will sound very similar to Gustave, but then once it hits the actual main melody and the different motives that I have here, or motifs, it becomes very apparent that this is completely different. But that's okay. It's cool to just kind of try to create something from, like, bringing in ideas from another, like taking inspiration from another piece and then making it your own. Regarding the actual melodies, I just have two motifs. So the first one is the first 8 bars here after 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is just repeated twice. And then I have the second motif here, again for another 8 bars. So again, it's all pretty simple. I didn't really spend too much time doing this. And then the first motif plays again for 8 bars, but this time I adjusted some of the notes around and changed it up a little bit so it sounds a little different. And this is kind of what Lorian was doing with his notes, where he would make variations to the same motif, and you can still kind of like it's still the same thing, but it's just slightly different or slightly altered. And then I do the same thing again for the second motif down here. So yeah, that's about it. And here's what it sounds like. So there you go, a quick analysis of Gustave from the Expedition 33 soundtrack. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and let me know what you thought. And also, if you had any idea what was going on with the naming conventions of those chords, I'd also be curious to hear about that, because maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I could have sworn like that's how you're supposed to read it, is the chord over the note, and then whatever that note would be is what was supposed to be playing in the bass, or like that's the root of the note. But yeah, so I guess just let me know if you know what that answer is. But anyways, until next time.